This is the new 2024 Audi RS6 Performance, and it's a fantastic all-around car. Practical and fast and luxurious and very cool, and it's been updated for 24 with some more power and a few other changes I'll talk about. Today, I'm going to review the latest Audi RS6 Performance and show you all of its quirks and features. Today's video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, my online enthusiast car auction site that recently sold this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Check it out at carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new Audi RS6 Performance. Starting with a little overview of what exactly is this? What is the Performance? How is it different? What's going on here? So the basic situation is this. The Audi RS6 Avant finally came to the North American market for the 21 model year. This was the first time the RS6 Avant had ever been sold in North America. It came out for 21. Initially, it had a twin-turbo V8 with 590 horsepower, but for 24, the new RS6 Performance now has that same twin-turbo V8, but with 620 horsepower. That's a boost of 30 horsepower, in case you were doing the math. Now, the Performance is the only way you can get the RS6 for 24. There's no more base models, so they're all the RS6 Performance as of this year, but it is an upgrade over the outgoing model with more power and more torque, about 625 pound-feet of torque in the new RS6 Performance, which is an increase of about 35 pound-feet over the outgoing model. So more power and more torque, though it's worth pointing out, still the same V8, the same twin-turbo 4-liter V8, just tuned to make more power and deliver stronger acceleration. And indeed it does. 0 to 60 in the low 3-second range, which is tremendously fast with its standard all-wheel drive and 8-speed automatic transmission. And next up, beyond the extra power and torque, you might be wondering what other changes Audi has made for the new RS6 Performance for the 24 model year. And the answer is not really all that much, actually. Not much else has changed. You have more power and torque, but other than that, pretty minimal updates. One is they've removed some sound deadening material inside the car. The intent here is you can hear the exhaust a little bit louder with this stuff gone, a little less of a quiet luxury car experience. That apparently saved 18 pounds of weight. This car also has new wheels for the 24 model year. You can see them here, giant 22-inch wheels. They are lighter than the wheels before, and that saves 44 pounds of weight. So 62 pounds lighter. I'm sure you'll feel that. This car also has new tires compared to the previous RS6 models, different tires, and some new paint colors. But that's about it. There's really not all that much except for the extra power and torque. That's the big boost for 24. Now, it's worth pointing out that for 25, a new version of the RS6 joins the lineup. It's called the GT, and for some reason it looks like this. It is one of the strangest paint schemes I have seen on a modern vehicle. The whole point of a fast wagon is you have a subtle family car that just happens to have 600 horsepower. The GT throws that entirely out the window. To me, it looks preposterous, but they're doing it, and it's coming for 25. Apparently, pricing for the GT will be around $170,000, and it's limited to like 800 units globally, which makes sense. But even the regular version of the RS6, the non-GT, is pretty expensive. This car has a starting price of around $126,000 before options, which can take things higher from there. And now that we're done with the new stuff for the RS6 Performance, we move move on to the quirks and features of this car, starting with the new wheels, which are an interesting exterior quirk because they are just so big. These massive 22-inch wheels, they save weight compared to the old ones, but they are kind of cartoonish given the look of this vehicle. The RS6 is supposed to be a subtle luxury car that just happens to be crazy fast, and I think it succeeds with that look in basically every area other than these giant wheels, which to me just seemed, well, a little too giant. Now, in the past, Audi has offered the RS6 with a base level standard wheel and then an optional extra wheel. Almost everyone has gone with the optional extra one, but the base level one was kind of the way to keep this car subtle, and I preferred how it looked. I'm not sure if the entry level wheel will still remain for the RS6 Performance in 24, but I sure hope so. Anyway, other exterior quirks. Let's talk about the dance the lights do when you walk up to the car. You unlock the doors and you can see in front the lights have this little sweeping dance that they do to help indicate that the car is excited to see you now that you've returned to it. Same deal in the back. You walk up, you press unlock, and you can see the lights do their little dance, special, distinctive, kind of quirky and interesting to let you know, hey, let's get going, I'm here. But aside from that stuff, there aren't too many quirks to report on the outside of the RS6. And that's mainly because, again, this car is subtle. It's not intended to be different and crazy and in your face. Audi does a great job of making performance cars like this that don't really seem like performance cars unless you're getting beaten by one. And that's my very favorite thing about the RS6, just how normal it looks, but normal it is not. Nonetheless, there are some giveaways that this is a special car. You look down the side and the flared out fenders to accommodate the larger, wider tires definitely say that this is no standard A6 all-road station wagon. You also have dual exhausts around back. They're big. If you notice them, you'll know there's something powerful under the hood. I've never really been a fan of how the rear diffuser curves around the exhaust. I think that too is a little too look at me, but it's there and it's a distinctive styling touch of the RS6. Other than that, again, a very subtle sleeper car. You don't know it's fast unless you know. By the way, one other cool touch that I really love, badging. This car is technically the RS6 Avant, but it says that nowhere, Avant being Audi's term for, well, a station wagon. However, if you look inside and see the cargo cover, it says Avant on the top. You have to kind of know to look for it, but it's cool to see that little nod to the Audi term for station wagon, which has made so many car enthusiasts happy over all these years, just placed there subtly on the cargo cover inside the car. Now, beyond the relatively subtle exterior design for this car, aside from the wheels, the interior is also relatively subtle. It's not too aggressive or over the top, even though this is such a high-end performance car. They don't do any craziness in here. They kind of keep it subtle and restrained, which frankly, I suspect most buyers of this car probably want. Nonetheless, there are some nice high-performance car touches, although they're kept fairly minimal. One is the seats. This car has some pretty heavily bolstered seats. They're not like crazy carbon fiber bucket seats like you'd see in a sports car, but they do keep you in place pretty well in corners. You also have red stitching and nice perforated leather with red accents all throughout the seats, which makes them feel a little bit sportier as well. And you move on to the steering wheel and you can see Alcantara, which always feels nice and helps to mitigate sweat on a hot racetrack day. And you have red stitching on the inside of the steering wheel as well. You also even have Alcantara on the gear selector. Even though it's an automatic transmission, you're not exactly going to be shifting gears often. It's there and it feels nice. Move further along in this cabin, you have some carbon fiber trim on the dashboard, which again adds to the sporty look and feel of this car. And the seat belts are red trimmed. You can see the piping on the side of the belts is in red with the black seatbelt center, and that looks cool and again adds to the sporty touch of this car. It's not an over-the-top, look at me, I'm fast interior, but some nice subtle placements of performance stuff just to remind you that you're in something special. But on to the quirks of this interior. The best one is certainly the seatbelt buckles, which are illuminated. You can see the rim of the belt buckle lights up. So you get in this car at night, you're having trouble finding where to stick the seatbelt. Well, it's lit up, so it makes it a lot easier to know exactly where to buckle in. That's a great touch. Next up, another interesting quirk is the gear selector in this car. Like I said, finished in Alcantara, which is nice, but the odd part is getting into gear. You push the button on the side and move it down for drive, but then it pops back into the center. You push it up for reverse, neutral is somewhere in the middle, and park is a little button over on the side. It's all electronic. You don't just move it into place. Now, also interesting in this car, in the gauge cluster screen, this RS6 has night vision. You can see it's right here, and it basically uses heat to show you what's ahead of you. So at night, it's dark, you can't see pedestrians. It will show their body heat to make it more obvious to identify them. Very interesting feature. Not too many cars have night vision. I love it in rural areas, and it works well. And it even specially detects pedestrians. You can see right here, it's detecting Canon. It outlines them in an outline so you know that you're coming up to a pedestrian to make your drive safer. It's a cool feature of this car. And speaking of that gauge cluster screen, it's one of my very favorite things about new Audi models because it gives you a wide variety of configurable screen choices. For instance, you can either emphasize or de-emphasize the tachometer, whichever you would prefer. And from there, you can select whichever view you want, showing all sorts of different things. That night vision or vehicle data or media, music player, or even a full screen 3D map, which is a great feature. It's wonderful to see this level of configurability inside the gauge cluster screen. I love how well Audi does this and how easy it is with a couple of simple steering wheel buttons to switch between all of the different gauge icons so you can choose exactly what you want to see or switch to something else quickly if you want to change it. Now, since we're talking screens, you move past the gauge cluster screen and onto the center infotainment screen situation, and there are two screens you can see here, upper and lower. The upper screen is the general infotainment screen, and it does all the stuff you'd traditionally expect, like your navigation system, your music, media player, all that stuff is controlled on the upper screen, and frankly, it works reasonably well. It's quick to respond to your touch, it's fairly intuitive, not a huge screen, but it works and does exactly what you would want. Now, the lower screen below that primarily holds your climate control. So you have a two-screen setup that is fixed in place on the lower screen. So even as you're adjusting your navigation information, your music, your track, your climate controls will always stay on that lower screen. Even though they're not physical buttons, you always know where they are and what to press. Now, with that said, the benefit of not making the climate controls physical buttons is seen when you do stuff that is less frequently required. The bottom screen can be used for that. So for instance, inputting a navigation destination, you can see here, I go to navigation, put in the destination. Now the lower screen has turned into a destination entry keyboard, and you can even use it as a writing pad. You can tap on it and write out your destination using that lower climate control screen. When you're done, the destination goes in the upper screen and your climate controls return in the lower screen, goes right back to normal. That's a pretty nifty feature. The lower screen is climate controls or less frequently used other items, giving you kind of the feel of a bigger screen when you need it. Now, also mounted here on the lower screen, you can see Audi's drive select buttons. This adjusts your drive mode. You can choose between various drive modes, and you can also choose between two different configurable Audi RS drive modes. You can select exactly what RS1 and RS2 do, and you can quickly access them with this RS button on the steering wheel. You just tap that and you go into RS1, tap it again, and you're in RS2, your configurable drive modes. That way you don't have to get in the car and to select your drive mode, press on the drive select icon 4 different times to go to the one you want. Just press RS on the steering wheel and you're there quickly. It's a cool feature. And next up, we move on to the back seat in the RS6, where you'll quickly discover the back seat is pretty generously sized. I'm sitting here with the front passenger seat quite far back, and yet I still have space for my knees, my head, my hips. You got a pretty decent size back here. Now, that's not that surprising. The RS6, the A6, the A6 wagon, they're all pretty large vehicles, but it is nice to see you're not really losing anything to an SUV in terms of rear seat room. And the other cool benefit of the back of this car, they didn't really skimp on anything that you have up front. You get all the nice benefits in back too. For example, you get dual zone climate control back here. Each rear seat has their own zone to choose from, and heated rear seats as well. And you can see dedicated climate vents back here too, plus dedicated charge ports for rear seat passengers. You have all that stuff. And you have all the nice cool Audi RS touches too. You open up the door and RS Performance is illuminated coming out of the door just like it is in front. You move further into the car and you have the same red stitched leather seats just like you do up front with the same perforated leather and red trim, and RS is stitched into the backrest just like you have up front. You also still have carbon fiber trim on the door panels and Alcantara trim on the door panels, again just like you have up front. And speaking of the door panels, you also have built-in rear sunshades. You can see here this tab, if you lift it up, that's a sunshade. You can connect it to the top of the window area and then keep rear passengers shaded, especially important for infants or anybody who just wants to block out from the sun, which is nice. You also still have the red trimmed seat belts back here with the red piping on the edges, which looks great, and you still have the illuminated seat belt buckles back here, just like you did in front, which is especially important for rear passengers. It's dark getting in the car at night trying to buckle your belt. You have the illumination back here that makes it easier. It's a great feature. Now, also worth pointing out, in back, you can drop the center armrest and you have access to, well, for one, a radically over-designed cup holder. You press on half of the top and then the whole thing opens up, giving you cup holders, and then you press the wrong direction in order to close it and it closes up, and that's how it works. You also have a tremendously small storage compartment here. It's wide and long, but not deep at all. However, it could be used for placing small pieces of paper, if that's what you want. And finally, we move on to the cargo area in the RS6. You open up the power tailgate, and you quickly discover this car has a large cargo area. You can see very wide, flat, long, a lot of space and size in here for whatever you might want to put back here, which is nice to see. It adds to the wonderful practicality of this practical performance car. Now, the rear line you can see is kind of more sloped than you might want to maximize your practicality. In a cargo area that truly focused on, well, cargo, this rear line would come further back to allow for taller items. But this car has some liberties because of its sporty design, and so it's not quite perfect in back, but it's still pretty large back here. And more importantly, it's bigger than the RS7. The RS6 is mechanically identical to the RS7, which is the same basic car except with a different body. It has 4 doors still, but sort of a more coupe-like flowing rear line as opposed to a traditional long roof station wagon with a larger cargo area. The RS7 is still a fantastic car, but I prefer the RS6. It doesn't really lose anything, but it gains the practicality of a wagon, as you can see here. And even with this car's sort of sloping roofline, it's still more space than the RS7. Anyway, just in case you're looking for even more space, you have a little netted area on the side of the cargo area, and you can lift up the cargo floor for more space, but there's not really all that much space there. A little bit, but not a huge amount. Also worth pointing out, back here in the cargo area, you have these latches where you can drop the rear seats, which is a nice touch. You pull on them, you have more cargo area, so you can stick larger items in here without having to go back to the seats themselves and drop them manually. All right, driving the RS6 Performance. Now, I've been driving this car around quite a bit for the last week, and the primary thing that I can tell you is that the RS6 Performance drives almost exactly like the RS6 regular. You do get 30 more horsepower, and it's actually 37 pound-feet of torque more precisely, and like 50 pounds less, 60 pounds less, but you don't really feel that. I mean, the car probably weighs 4,500 pounds or some crazy number, and you're going from 590 to 620 horsepower. That 30 horsepower bump isn't the same as going from like 100 to 130. You feel that, you don't really feel this. The car is still immensely fast, but basically everything that I've said and felt and experienced about the regular RS6 still applies to this one. Which is to say, a lot of really good stuff, as you can imagine. This car is fast, it is high-tech, it is ultra-luxurious, it looks good, it's practical, it does everything as you would expect it to at 126 grand before options. It has a really high price tag, but it is a really impressive car in that it really checks every box. And in a world of high-performance SUVs becoming more and more common, being able to have a wagon that is rarer, that is, in my opinion, better looking, that is cooler, and that has a more car-like driving experience than all of those SUVs is a pretty neat thing. Now, there's a couple of drawbacks about this car as I see them. The biggest is, number one, the ride quality. I mean, it's harsh. So I have a regular Mercedes-Benz E-Class station wagon, not a high-performance AMG model, but a brand new regular E450. And that car just rides so much better that it's like night and day driving between the two. This car is harsh. You feel the bumps. It's a performance car. And Audi would say, hey, you made this choice. You know, you decided you want to go after performance cars, so that's what you got, and so you're going to get harsh ride quality. And they're right. But I think a lot of people who are buying this for like family car duty don't necessarily want a really harsh sports car like ride. Well, that's what you're going to be getting. So that's one of the drawbacks. The other drawback is the car is just so expensive. And if you're really using it as a family car, I'm not sure how often you can actually really exploit the performance potential. I was talking to some of my friends about this car, and of course, fast wagons are like the vaunted, most desired car in the enthusiast world. All car enthusiasts talk about how much they want a fast wagon. But the more I think about it, the more I realize I would actually rather have a regular wagon for family duty like I have, and then a sports car for actual sports car duties. A regular wagon is better at family things, and a sports car is better at sports car things. And combining the two really only works if you have that phantom situation where you can only have one car to do everything. If you have one parking spot in New York City, if you have a one-car garage at your house, etc., then this car starts to make sense. But otherwise, I'm not entirely sure that the compromise on ride quality and cost are worth, you know, the massive expense of this car if you're going to just be using it for family car duty. Now, with that said, it's also just incredibly cool. And so I think there's a lot of people out there who are like, you know, yeah, I could get a 992 and a, you know, regular SUV for family duty, but this is cooler than either of those things. This thing is actually like really a special, unusual, desirable, interesting vehicle, and it's rare. You don't see too many, and you know, you go fast in a family car. There's something really cool about that. And it does really do it all. I just wonder if, you know, when you factor in the price tag, when you factor in the ride quality, if maybe it's just a little bit too harsh for most people who would maybe be better. So I kind of get the sense that people with one of these cars also have the disposable money to have bought a Boxster S or a Boxster Spider as a weekend toy as well. It's just fantastic. It really, really does a great job of mid-range acceleration, smooth power delivery, combined with this transmission, smooth shifts and yet quick shifts, which is hard to do together, but this car does well. It's nice to still have a V8, so you don't have to say, hey, this six-cylinder feels like a V8. This is actually a V8. It has all the cylinders, it has all the performance, it has that mid-range torque that just feels so strong like a V8 does. Next up, handling. This car is a fantastic handler. Given the size of the car, you wouldn't really expect it to handle as well as it does. It is not a sports car in the sense that you do feel a little bit more body roll. You do feel a little bit more weight. The steering is not quite as precise. It's not tuned for like a incredibly quick precision like a 488 or something like that. But for a big family wagon, this car is absolutely amazingly impressive in the way that it steers and handles and drives. And then we have the technology, the interior quality in this car. It's a very nice place to sit. It feels very comfortable, very luxurious in here, very quiet in this car, except for the engine noise, etc. But you don't really notice anything going on outside. I don't hear anything. It feels like the expensive luxury car that it is in that regard. And so that's the 2024 Audi RS6 Performance. This is a special car and one of the coolest cars on sale, certainly one of the coolest cars with 4 doors anywhere. And if you want a fast wagon, right now it's the only game in town as we await the arrival of the new Mercedes AMG E63 in a year or two. This is a truly fantastic car, and now it's time to give the new RS6 a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 72 out of 100, which puts the RS6 Avant Performance here, dead even with the original RS6 Avant and also even with the BMW M5 CS and the Mercedes-AMG E63 wagon. That makes sense because the new RS6 Performance is very similar to the original RS6 Avant with only a few key updates here and there, not really enough to move the needle in any direction or add a point on any of my metrics. This is still an excellent car and a truly fantastic combination of performance, practicality, good looks, and luxury.